I'm now taking leaders' questions under Standing Order 36. And just a gentle reminder about time limits and also mobile phones. Ich habe Mary Lou MacDonald.
Taoiseach, 3 years ago your government promised that it would stop vulture funds bulk buying family homes from under the noses of ordinary home buyers. This followed considerable public anger on the back of a fund attempting to buy up the majority of homes at Mullen Park in Maynooth. On the floor of the Dail, you said, "What happened in Maynooth and Hollystown is not right. We do not want investment funds in any form coming in and buying substantially complete developments that could have been bought by first-time buyers, upgraders, or even approved housing bodies." You then proceeded to introduce measures that left the door wide open for vultures. At the time, we warned you that your measures were doomed to failure. We told you that you didn't go far enough to deter the vultures, but you ignored those warnings, Taoiseach. So fast forward 2.5 years. More than 1,200 family homes have been snapped up by vulture funds since you introduced your regulations. Homes on which they charge extortionate rent. So far from stopping the vulture funds, they are laughing all the way to the bank, and it's a real kick in the teeth for everyone who has saved every spare euro and made real sacrifices to try and get a mortgage deposit together. The latest such scandal has occurred in Belcamp Manor in North Dublin, where a vulture fund snapped up 46 of 54 homes in that estate, robbing ordinary families of the chance to buy a home. And they're going to let these homes, at rents of upwards of €3,000 a month. Your response to the Belcamp Manor bulk purchase was that government will now have to look at what happened. But this didn't come out of the blue, Taoiseach. In fact, last year Minister McGrath was told by Department of Finance officials that the vulture funds had snapped up and were still snapping up family homes, and it's gotten worse since then. So your government knows and has known that this was happening, and you know how it's happened and why. The stamp duty you set out in May 2021 on the bulk buying of homes was just far too low. And you also left tens of thousands of homes already in the planning process at risk of being snapped up by the vultures. So you shouldn't be surprised. This has happened because government left the door open and the vultures swooped through. So caithfí an rialtas stoppa chur leis na grac cistí ó hithe ceannach faoi chrón gná daoine. Ní mór den rialtas gníomhú go deimhnach thaobh na daoine atá édóchasach ag deach féin a bheith acu. Taoiseach, government must act now to finally clip the wings of the vulture funds. You say that your aim is to stop these funds swooping in and buying up housing estates, yet the government has indicated that you will vote down Sinn Féin's motion to do just that. Minister O'Brien says government is reviewing the situation. Really? At this stage? Every TD now has a chance tomorrow night to vote to actually clip the wings of vultures, and I'm asking each of you to do so, to stand with ordinary home buyers in your constituencies against the unfair financial power of the vulture funds. And Taoiseach, I'm asking you to realise the damage these funds are doing. I'm urging you to change your mind and to support Sinn Féin's motion to stop these funds in their tracks.
I don't like to see investment funds buying up family homes en masse. I know you don't either, and I said that before. But what you've represented today in the Dáil isn't the full story, as is so often the case. You've engaged in a degree of misleading behaviour. So the government did change the law. We changed the law back in May 2021 after the events in Maynooth, which you described. And that prohibited the bulk buying of houses and duplexes by a single buyer, and also allowed local authorities to put in a planning condition preventing the sale of homes in bulk, such as this. I did look into it. The planning permission from this particular development in Dublin 17 dates from 2019. So the planning permission was granted 2 years before the law was changed. You'll understand that laws can't be changed retrospectively in this state. In relation to the stamp duty is at 10%. We're not ruling out an increase in that. Minister Bryden's made that clear, but it is something that has to be considered carefully because any change to tax can have unforeseen impacts and also sometimes doesn't work. So we need to make sure that if there is any change, that is thought through and teased through correctly. But just to be very clear, Deputy, we have changed the law on this. From any planning permission granted from 21 onwards, this couldn't happen. This is an old, outstanding planning permission, and that's why it was possible in this case. In terms of sales of family homes to bulk buyers, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I think it was something like 600 or 680 last year out of 50,000 transactions, maybe 1,000 out of 100,000 transactions. It's not minimal, it's not inconsiderable, but to create the impression that this is what's happening in huge numbers wouldn't be accurate.
So I have set out for you the facts, including, and I have acknowledged, in fact, I put it to you that you did make a response in 2021 on the back of the Maynooth situation. I also reminded you, Taoiseach, at the time that you were advised that you hadn't gone far enough. And I also told you that in July of last year, department officials told the Minister that the regulations were failing. They said very clearly that funds were continuing to buy up family homes. Now, you say that you want this to stop. I presume we're all agreed on that. So for the life of me, I cannot understand why you propose then to vote down a proposal that will do just that. Because you can't have it both ways, Taoiseach. You can't say that you wish this behaviour to stop and then fail to take the very measures that would in fact stop the behaviour. Bottom line is that the loser in this scenario are hard-pressed families, workers, people who've scrimped and saved, as you know, only to find that still and yet, despite all of the rhetoric from government, that vulture funds can still swoop in and still buy up family homes.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. I haven't seen the detail of that advice to Minister McGrath. I expect when I do see it, I'll find out that you haven't told the full story, you haven't given the full picture to the Irish people, and that you've engaged in a degree of misrepresentation and misleading behaviour. I suspect what it's going to say as well is that the number of family homes bought up by investment funds might have been something like 1% of total sales or 2%, but I will double check on that, Deputy. As I said earlier, the government doesn't want to see family homes being bought up by investment funds, not at all. It's something that we think is undesirable socially and economically. That's why we changed the law in 2021 to stop this happening. It doesn't apply to old permissions. This is an old permission from 2019. Your contention is that by increasing stamp duty to 17%, that will solve the problem. You don't know that, Deputy. 17% mightn't be enough, or it might have other unintended consequences that do harm to people and businesses that you haven't thought about. And that's why it's important that we give any tax change very careful consideration.
Deputy Holly Kearns.
Taoiseach, when will your government act to prevent a genocide in Gaza? In just over 100 days, more than 25,000 people in Gaza have been killed. 80% of the world's hungriest people are now in Gaza because of a man-made famine. Contagious disease is sweeping through the nearly 2 million displaced people. The healthcare system has been obliterated. Not only are senior Israeli government officials making regular genocidal statements, they're explicitly rejecting a two-state solution. Yesterday, Israel's Foreign Affairs Minister suggested the international community built an artificial island in the Mediterranean for Palestinians. Clearly, the Israeli government has lost all grip of reality, proportionality and humanity. So what are you waiting for? for the death toll to reach 30,000, 40,000, 50,000? As you know, Taoiseach, the Social Democrats have a motion tomorrow calling on the government to act and support South Africa's case under the Genocide Convention against Israel at the International Court of Justice at the earliest opportunity as a matter of urgency. Last night, sometime after 10 p.m, we found out that the government, it was changing the Dáil schedule this week to introduce your own motion on Gaza today in advance of ours tomorrow. I read through it and I wonder why you bothered. It doesn't contain any commitment to intervene on the side of South Africa at the International Court of Justice. All you say is this will be considered after the preliminary ruling. Taoiseach, it's obvious that the government doesn't want to use or even contemplate the word genocide when it comes to Israel's actions in Gaza. That's why you're refusing to take a stance now and signal your support for South Africa in the Court of Justice. You want to wait until you have the cover of the preliminary ruling and then you'll consider your options. This approach lacks courage. It's at odds with the annihilation that we're witnessing and your words of support for Palestinians. While your government is faffing around, other countries are making their intentions clear. Germany have already announced they will intervene in the case on the side of Israel, saying they firmly and explicitly reject the accusation of genocide. The US and the UK have also made their views clear. They have rubbished South Africa's case as meritless and unjustified. Taoiseach, Western countries are lining up to support Israel. There could not be more of a pressing need for countries like Ireland to signal their support for South Africa now. And your government's claim it cannot simply isn't credible. In fact, you have a duty to do so. Under the Genocide Convention, states have a duty to punish and to prevent genocide. And the first step of fulfilling that duty is to assess the risk of genocide. That means starting the process now, not waiting. Will you signal Ireland's intention to intervene at the earliest possible opportunity? And will you start that process now?
Thanks very much, Deputy. Like everyone in the House, I'm appalled at the ongoing violence that's occurring in Gaza and indeed in the West Bank and in Israel, where millions of people have been displaced and tens of thousands of people have been killed, mostly women and children. And we should not forget that there are two sides to this conflict. And it is the case that many more Palestinians have died than Israelis, and many more Palestinians have been displaced than Israelis, but there have been Israelis killed and Palestinians and Israelis displaced too, and I think it's important that that should be acknowledged perhaps in your next remarks. In terms of what we're doing as a government, we're working at EU level, at UN level and at bilateral level to do anything we practically can do to bring about a ceasefire. We are among the first countries in the world to call for a humanitarian ceasefire, and that's the way we voted at UN and EU level, and we'll continue to look for that because we need a ceasefire so the humanitarian aid can get in, the killing can stop, and the hostages who are still being held in Gaza can be released. What happens at the ICJ and the International Criminal Court is really important. We're very big supporters of these institutions, but I'm sad to say I don't believe that an order from the ICJ will bring about an end to this conflict. It didn't in Ukraine. And it may be 4 years before the case is finally decided. So this conflict will be brought to an end by diplomacy and by politics. And that's why we're focusing on diplomacy and politics, Deputy. In terms of what the government is asking the House to agree tonight, is to recognise that our overwhelming priority is exactly that, trying to achieve a ceasefire on both sides and an end to the violence by diplomacy and politics. We're also demanding unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza, and we're supporting the UN in its work in that regard. We're also committing to support any decision of the ICJ on preliminary measures. These will be final and binding on the parties concerned, and we'll urge all parties to genocide convention to do so. We're also committing to consider an intervention in the South Africa versus Israel case at the ICJ. This is done at the point when South Africa would file its main case, its memorial case. To date, while some countries have indicated that they will intervene, none have yet, because that doesn't happen until that point. This is exactly the approach we took in relation to Ukraine. We will also drive efforts at EU level to bring about sanctions against violent settlers in the West Bank. In relation to ICJ cases, Deputy, I can inform the House that the Attorney-General will travel to The Hague on the 22nd of February to make Ireland's intervention in person in relation to the situation in Israel and Palestine. And that relates to an existing case before the ICJ in relation to Israel's actions in Palestine and the West Bank. So I hope that proves that we're taking this seriously, that we take the ICJ seriously, but we want to do this properly, just as we have with that case and just as we did in relation to Ukraine.
Taoiseach, it's interesting that you mention the case in Ukraine, because the Taoiseach had no such reluctance when it came to Russia. Less than 2 months after Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, he labelled it a genocide. And I think that the double standard really beggars belief. Israel claims that it's doing everything in its power to protect civilians in Gaza. It says that while it's dropping 2,000-pound bombs on densely populated residential areas. These enormous bombs aren't being used sparingly either. They've been dropped in their hundreds on an area half the size of Louth. How can countries that claim to value human rights and international law sit back and watch this? And Taoiseach, I agree that Ireland has been a really strong voice for the Palestinian people on the world stage, but words won't provide a defence from the bombs, from the famine, and from the disease sweeping through Gaza. Saying you can't act now is simply disingenuous. Like I said, Germany has signalled their intention to act. We could signal our intention now, start the process with a legal team on establishing the case, and we must stand on the right side of history with regard to this. Sitting by and watching this happen, waiting when 250 people are dying every single day, simply lacks the courage that is needed at this point. Will you act with the same degree of urgency as Germany? Will you act with the same degree of urgency you did with Ukraine and signal your intention to support South Africa's case at the Court of Justice immediately?
Thanks, Deputy. As I mentioned earlier, the Attorney-General will travel to the International Court of Justice in The Hague on the 22nd of February and will in person make Ireland's intervention in relation to a case relating to Israel and Palestine and the actions happening there. So I think that demonstrates that we take these things seriously and that we take the ICJ seriously. In relation to the Genocide Convention case, we'll adopt the same approach as we did in relation to Russia and Ukraine. We will wait until South Africa files its memorial, its main case. We'll consider it, and then at that point we'll decide on the nature of any intervention. But we do agree that South Africa's case is valid. In relation to your own motion, Deputy, I think it is good in parts, but I do think it is flawed, and I'd like you to consider amending it. It doesn't condemn Hamas. It doesn't call for the release of the hostages, and I think that's wrong. It doesn't call for Hamas to cease fire or to disarm, and Hamas is a terrorist organisation, and terrorist organisations should disarm. In fact, the only real mention of Hamas and the events of October the 7th is to say that they don't justify Israel's actions, and I don't think that's good enough.
Taoiseach, people in Waterford and the South East know that you and government have forgotten them. In the elections of 2011, 16 and 20, voters from across the South East, left to stew in their anger, turned away from the traditional parties of government. Parliamentary responses I copied to your office in recent weeks shows that University Hospital Waterford, the South East Regional Model 4 hospital, received just €83 million capital investment in the past 10 years. By contrast, in the same decade, government awarded €227 million on average to the comparator Model 4s in Galway, Limerick and Cork. €83 million versus €227 million. That is pure discrimination of the South East region. On July the 11th, at Leaders' Questions regarding University Hospital Waterford, you stated to me, and I quote, "Under this government, €91 million has been invested in the hospital so far. Copy PQs I gave to you and to each of your ministers recently show that Waterford was awarded just €36.7 million in capital health funding from this 33rd Dail, not the €91 million you suggest. This was again but a fraction of the €130 million average given to the other three hospitals that I mentioned previously in that 4-year period. Your statement to the House, July 11th, I believe is misleading and untrue, Taoiseach. I therefore invite you to correct the Dail record in your response. Given the evidence of 10 years of discriminatory capital underinvestment to this hospital, I would ask you, Do you understand the right of people in the South East to be angry when they look at the present Dublin-Cork cabinet? Because the evidence of investment shafting extends now beyond our hospital. It goes into our South East aviation sector, our public transport, our roads development, our FDI generation, and most egregious and especially into our South East higher education sector. For the South East Technological University, this government has slow-walked the land purchase while providing no capital to carry out design work, nothing to fund construction of a new teaching building on this land site. And this despite government's clear understanding that not a single new teaching building has been delivered to Waterford College campus this millennium. The Waterford Engineering Building, first promised by you in 2011, government sideswiped into a 2020 secondary phasing investment process, and it is now just another broken promise to add to the many previous. Your 3 government programmes, 2011 to 2020, singled out WIT for special attention. This is manifested now as a natty rebrand to the region in an underfunded merger. I know you tire of me, Taoiseach, raising these issues, and you'll feel compelled to demonstrate that I am wrong by referencing other regional products to prove that everything is okay. But people in the Waterford and the South East know that we are not getting a fair share. We are not fools, and we should not be taken as such. The recent history of the Irish water protests, I believe, Taoiseach, were not properly understood by government at that time because they were never really about water. Rather, they were an expression of seething anger from people who felt ignored, mistreated, let down and left behind. Your finely tuned political antenna, Taoiseach, does not seem to understand the building anger in the region. Neither does your government seem to be motivated to do anything to assuage it. In one of your first speeches as Taoiseach, you promised that Waterford would not be forgotten, and yet, ironically, that is precisely what you continue to do.
Thanks, Deputy. There has been considerable investment in University Hospital Waterford under this government. Just since 2019, there's been a 40% increase in staffing at the hospital. The hospital's budget is now about €270 million. And also there's been a 33% increase in the budget since 2019. So very considerable investment in Waterford. That includes the second cath lab, which people campaigned for a long time and campaigned very hard for it in the region. And that has been open now. We want to extend the hours to weekends as soon as possible. There's a new outpatient unit. There's also the Dunmore wing, which I've had the pleasure to visit, and also the new palliative care unit. And Deputy, I can assure you that I don't think that investment in University Hospital Waterford has been adequate either. That's why there needs to be more. So among the future investments coming is the new surgical hub, which will help people to get operations they need much more quickly. And also the replacement of the adult mental health unit with a 50-bed single-bed unit, which I think will be a considerable improvement too. And of course, we need to examine future capacity at the hospital. It is a hospital that performs very well, experiences very little emergency department overcrowding, really helped out when the fire happened in Wexford. And I think that hospitals that perform well should be rewarded. And that's why I want to see more investment happening in Waterford Hospital in the coming years. And you can be sure that is going to happen.
Taoiseach, you didn't actually correct the record to what I highlighted to you. I'm glad that you see support for University Hospital Waterford, as do I. And I point out to you that since we've opened the 2 cath labs down there, which are operating 60 hours a week, we are now emulating the same service activity as the Cork Centre with 5 cath labs and 168 hours schedule, despite the fact that the Heritage report in 2015 said that there was no requirement for a second cath lab and take the emergency services out of it. But this is what I'm speaking to you. And I could extend that onto our technological university. We've had no capital investment there whatsoever beyond a land purchase. And as I pointed out to you, no funding to build a building. The engineering building is nowhere to be seen. And I could watch on television during the week and see 3 senior ministers walking around DCU smiling while they awarded €61 million in accommodation grants. And nothing done for the South East Regional University. No extension of the borrowing framework. No looking at the lecturers' contracts as promised. And nothing done by way of accepting the €350 million project plan that has been put forward by the president of the university there. And Taoiseach, I would say to you, in recent weeks, you produced your capital calculator to show how much money Fine Gael is putting back into people's pockets. I suggest you might look at a calculator calculator to see how much it has taken out of the South East region or left us behind, because we are suffering inequity. And I have worked very hard with you and government to try and address that, but it is not happening at this point.
Thanks, Deputy. In terms of clarifying the record, I think I've done that already by correspondence, and like a lot of things, it depends on how you count it. Whether you count the spend when it's actually spent, which often happens after the building is already built, when it's announced or when it's under construction. But what we don't disagree on, Deputy, is that Waterford and the South East need more investment. And I can guarantee you that so long as this government remains in office and so long as there's no fundamental change in our economic policies and our foreign policy, that will continue to be possible. That's why it's important that this government should remain in office. There has been considerable IDA investment in Waterford and the South East. As you pointed out, we established the long-promised university for the South East, and that includes the purchase of the Waterford Crystal site in Waterford, which I think is very welcome, and we will get the engineering building done, but you'll be aware that there's complications in the negotiations there. Work has begun on the North Quays development, which will transform the city of Waterford, opening up a whole new quarter. It even involves the removal and moving of the train station, so it's a huge investment. And there's also been considerable road investment in the South East, like the new Ross bypass, for example, Enniscorthy, and in relation to Waterford Airport, we're keen to invest in that. Minister McGrath visited not too long ago. We made a commitment on funding. It turns out that it's not enough. A further business case has been submitted for more, and we're examining that with due haste.
Anísigh Bugger Aigurtí an Ches Iarnach ó Ceachta Richard O'Donoghue.
Don Colla. Taoiseach, we spoke on this recently on the minimum wage increase, and at the time you had said comments to me that on one hand that I was welcoming the wage increase, which I do, but I also wanted protection for the businesses that would be impacted with the wage increase and what the government could do to counteract it. And now it has come to the forefront when, Taoiseach, I believe you have received letters of concerns from IBEC outlining their concerns about the additional cost your government has set out. The letter highlights specific worries about the pace and scale government labour costs, including an increase in minimum wage to $12.70 and changes to employers' PSI, statutory sick pay, pension, auto-enrolment, work permit salary thresholds and protective leave entitlements. IBEX estimates that the government's labour market policy will add $4 billion annually to the wage bill of Irish employers, leading to labour costs increase of 25 to 30% in the most impacted firms. According to an article in RTE, a third of new companies close within the first 4 years of their existence. A post-Christmas period has seen a wave of restaurant closures in Ireland, and the Restaurant Association of Ireland, RAI, claiming that 280 members have closed in the last 6 months. I urge the government to intervene in this. Now, Minister, I'm an employer myself, and I agreed with the minimum wage increase. And all the employers that I spoke to also agreed with the wage increase. But what it has actually created in certain cases is inflation. So you go to the hotel industry and you look at the minimum wage, which went to $12.70. But then the people that were on €13 wanted to go to $14.30, and it was a knock-on effect through all the wage increases on all the hospitality sectors. So in one business I spoke to, which has 7 employees and 2 part-time, it's 40,000 of an increase to their business. Now, the only way they can counteract that and pay the minimum wage increase, which they said the employees deserve, is to, without increasing their product, is by going into their maintenance bill. Now, they said by going into the maintenance, if anything breaks down, that means that they're closed anyway. And if they up the prices, that means that the same wage increase that we are giving is actually being taken back in by using a wage, which means that they won't be sustainable anymore. One hotel I spoke to said that this will actually cost them $400,000 extra this year. And if you look at this on a wedding or a major event, it's €4 per sitting is what the increase will be, which means it goes back again to the same people that after getting the wage increase, it's actually going back in again to the government's purse when it comes around in a circle.
Thanks very much, Deputy, for raising this important issue, and I know a lot of deputies have done so in government parties and opposition parties alike. As a government, we're a government that supports enterprise and a government that wants to make work pay. And we believe it's possible to reward enterprise and also reward work. But there are interplays and there are balances that have to be struck, and we have to strike them right. I acknowledge that the cost of business is very high and is rising. Some of that is down to pay, a lot of it's down to energy, and some of it is down to the cost of supplies and materials. Some of this is government influenced, much of it the government has no influence over. And we are helping business. Over €250 million will be injected into small businesses in the form of grants by the end of March, and that's designed to help businesses with cash flow, particularly at this very difficult time. And we are now seeing energy prices fall, which is very encouraging, and I hope we'll see interest rates fall throughout the course of this year as well. In relation to the increase in the minimum wage, that was recommended by the Low Pay Commission, and our plan is to bring the minimum wage up to the level of a living wage, which is about 60% of median earnings, and we want to do that as soon as we possibly can. But we acknowledge that we have to monitor how this works out on the ground, because we've seen very big increases in the minimum wage in recent years. It's roughly double, or it's not double, but it's much higher than it was 10, 11 years ago. And despite a very big increase in the minimum wage, we haven't seen unemployment rise. In fact, the reverse has happened. There are more people at work than ever before. And while there are businesses open and closing all the time, the number of closures at the moment is below the long-term average of 50 per 10,000. But this is something we'll have to monitor very closely, because there's no point in putting up somebody's wages if they then lose their job or have their hours cut. So this is something we'll have to monitor over the next couple of months and take account of when the Low Pay Commission makes its recommendation for next year, because there are other employment-related costs that are going to rise, like pension contributions, for example, under auto-enrolment, and the 0.1% increase in PRSI. So I take what businesses are saying very seriously. We acknowledge the cost of business is high. We are helping, particularly with the €250 million that will be injected into small businesses in the next couple of months. But the key thing we need to monitor is there a fall-off in employment as a consequence of this increase? And do we see businesses closing at a faster rate than they would on the long-term average? We're not seeing that yet, but we do need to look out for it.
Most of the businesses that are closing are SMEs, small, local, medium enterprise. They're not international businesses, they're small, local enterprise businesses. What you could have done in the interim, and it would have had an immediate effect, is reduce the VAT back to 9%. Across the board, it was brought in the interim before, it worked. It could be working now until we find a solution. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. I listened to a man recently, and I've listened to a lot of parents recently, when 4 of their children, their 4th child is now leaving the country to set up their life in another country, and they're following their brothers and sisters across the water. And the young man said to his father, he said, "Dad, I'm sorry, I'm going." He said, "I'll never afford a house in this country. I'll live and I'll work, but I'll never have anything here. I'm now going to follow my brothers and sisters to create a life." Now, we've all seen people leave this country when in their youth and come home to set up family and live here. He said that will be no longer the case. We are leaving, we're not coming home, because we can no longer see home as being sustainable for us to raise our families for the future. That we have to do it in another country and we can't do it in home. So I'm asking you, Taoiseach, intervene now, reduce the VAT rate to 9% now, protect our small businesses. The multinationals can protect themselves, but our Irish local businesses need your help and need it now.
Taoiseach, to conclude.
The businesses, particularly small businesses, have received unprecedented support from government over the past 3 or 4 years. During COVID, we helped pay the wages and we helped pay the overheads. During the energy crisis, we helped with the energy bills through the TBES. We reduced VAT to 9% on a temporary basis. We brought in tax warehousing, and we also have now a new grant that businesses will receive in the next couple of months. The sad reality is that there are a number of businesses in the state that have only got by in the past couple of years because of that state support, and some of those aren't viable. And that is a sad truth, but one that no government can simply subsidise forever. In relation to the story you tell about somebody emigrating to set up their lives abroad, of course that happens all the time for all sorts of different reasons. But let's not forget, in each of the last 7 years, the number of Irish citizens leaving has been less than the number of Irish citizens returning, the same. So this narrative that huge numbers of Irish people are abandoning the country for better lives abroad, the truth is different. There's a lot of people going, well, Deputy, they are, because in the past, Deputy, you're entitled to your opinions, you're not entitled to your own facts. The facts are, in the past 3 years, 80,000 Irish citizens left and went abroad for all sorts of different reasons. 90,000 came back. It's a fact, Deputy.
Dermot Shinjar le Teshton and the Gannery of spoken with Ryan Ishkuji, Gnona Dola done shots and shots. Moving on, understanding order 35 and calling on the
Last Count Corla, on a point of order, can I ask for the Taoiseach to correct the record? He said that we didn't mention Hamas in our Dáil motion. That is incorrect. We did, and we referred to their acts on October 7th as an atrocity. If he could correct the record.
Count Corla, I think Deputy may be incorrect, and we can check the record. I believe I said that they only mentioned Hamas in the context of their crimes on October 7th, which they say don't justify Israel's response. But there's no condemnation. There's no call for the release of the hostages. There's no call for Hamas to cease fire. There's no call for that terrorist organisation to disarm.
Thank you.
To present facts in this case as
Deputies, please. Thank you. Tommy Jigbogarai.